Welcome back. So in the previous video, we covered the process view, which is one of the Django middleware hook that is called before a view is returned. So in this video, we will talk about the process exception. The process exception raises an exception from the view, and as a hook, the process exception takes in a request and an exception object and retain none or an HTTP response. If you've missed our previous video, check out the link in the upper right corner to see what we've covered about the process view hook in Django middleware framework. Without further ado, let's go to the demo and demonstrate how we can use process exception, how we can customize process exception in our customized middleware. Okay, we've got our view files where we can define different request handler or view. Before we customize the process exception, which is one of the hook in Django middleware. So the process exception takes in a request and an exception. The exception in this instance is an exception thrown in our view. We'll see that how an exception is thrown in our view. The process exception can either return none, or it can also retain an HTTP response object. Of course, the HTTP response is now defined in this case. So let's import that. From Django, HTTP imports HTTP response. So when the exception is thrown from our view, if we don't customize the process exception and we do have the Django debug option set to true, Django would automatically use its customized templates to throw the error. Django will get the exception from the view, use its customized exception templates, and render the exception as a template. So let's remove our process exception. Before we demonstrate that, we can comment this out. So we comment our process exception for the sake of demonstration. For the sake of this video, let's create a new view, a simple view. We name a view templates, something like a policy templates or policy HTML templates. The request, we got our request, and the policy HTML templates will return the HTTP response. We need to import our HTTP response from Django. HTTP imports HTTP response. So the HTTP response, we can return, it can take in a little HTML tag, or we can create our HTML tag as a string of tag. HTML, we got HTML body, the body. Let's name this, let's return something like, in the body we can write templates. We can call that policy templates. Simple, just to demonstrate how we can customize the process exception. We create our templates, our view, simple view. We can even pass the async. So we make this a view asynchronous. Let's go on the URL configuration, create a new path. We name the path home. Of course, we need our handler, policy templates. We don't have to pass the name. So we have our policy template. Let's check and see that we can get we can retain some HTML with the path home from the main URL configuration of policy, as we can see here. To do that, let's go on the browser and check it out. So localhost 8000 policy. Of course, we don't need policy /policy, because with policy, we're retaining our policy objects. This is our API endpoint, but we just want to get the HTML home, the template. So our policy templates can return, our policy home can retain is, a chunk of templates, which state policy template. Now if we throw an error in our handler, in our policy handler, if we throw an arrow, let's create an intentional arrow view. So instead of passing the HTML in reference, we can pass something like an undefined variable. So undefined variable is not defined. Of course, our policy of view will throw an arrow. And let's see what's gonna happen after we refresh the server and request the home. So we got an arrow. As you can see, Django catch an arrow for us from the view and use its customized templates if we set the setting to be true, and then render the arrow, giving much more detail about what's happening in our project. So name undefined is not defined in our file view line 24 in the handler policy HTML templates. But how can we customize our exception, our process exception, which is run right after the view is called? It's thrown an arrow from the view. So we want to customize our process exception. Let's go ahead and customize that. So we can uncomment the process exception. Simply, instead of letting Django get the exception from our view and use its customized templates, we can pass in literally, we can customize our exception by returning our own HTTP response, which takes in an exception. And the exception is the exception that comes from our view, and we pass it as a string and we return an HTTP response and see what's gonna happen. Of course, we need to refresh the server and let's check. So if we customize our process exception and refresh, now we can see instead of using the Django default templates, we are returning the exception, which means as soon as we get the exception, we are telling our middleware to create its own response instead of using the Django response with a customized template. And we get name undefined is not defined without getting all the detail about the error. So that's all for process exception. The process exception takes in a request and an exception and return none or an HTTP response.